Now I know that dwarves can be obstinate, pig-headed, secretive, difficult, suspicious, with the worst manners you can possibly imagine, but they're also very brave and kind and loyal to a fault, and I would promote them if I can. So join me on this little journey as I wax lyrical about my early years of collecting dwarves, my time at workshop painting dwarves, and the dwarf tank that never was. I'm Peachy, and this is Peachy Tips. Cheers. No beard, it's fine, I can drink this. I'm not going to get on my beard. I'm just a youngling. Beardling, not a youngling. That's something totally different. Now, many years ago, when I was a wee nipper, beardling even, probably didn't even have enough hair on my face, a cat could lick it off. That's how much hair I had. So not really a true dwarf. But one day, my dad came home, set in front of me a little blister pack of dwarf hammerers. Now, I never intended to collect dwarfs. There was Empire, there was Dogs of War, there was Chaos, lots of cool factions. Little stunty warrior men, wasn't for me. But then I began painting these 4 hammerers in their blister packs. Those were the days, folks, when you'd get 4 miniatures in a blister pack for £5. I know, it was a long time ago, but I digress. So I got these dwarf hammerers, opened them up, cleaned them up, because at this point I did understand some basics of cleaning miniatures and clipping off all those little feed lines and bits of flash. And I fell in love with dwarfs. I don't know what it was, whether it was just the fact that it was easy to paint because there was lots of chainmail and beard with a big pudgy nose, maybe, I don't know. But I got hooked. And then after that, my dad got me the Dwarf Army book, the one at the time, the 5th edition. We'd recently got the box set with the Bretonnians and the Saurus. None of those really hooked me. My dad was a fan of the Bretonnians, which was fine. I started painting the Saurus, but I just wasn't interested. But these dwarfs, there was something different about them. And I think that's where my love for dwarfs began. So I got the army book, poured through this mighty tome with lots of shiny pictures of all sorts of different types of dwarfs. You had dwarf longbeards, they had long beards, longer beards than normal dwarfs, and dwarfs had quite long beards. Then you'd move on to things like the hammers, which I had, iron breakers. Ooh, they look cool, I like the look of iron breakers. But then there was these other guys called troll slayers, almost like woad warriors with big ginger hair, bright orange hair in a punk rocker style. Now those guys, they took me. Now I didn't know dwarf slayers would be for me until one day this book appeared in front of me and I flicked through the pages. Yeah, I was sold. Dwarfs, all the way for me. Now my hobby journey with the dwarfs was very minimal at the start, because at the time it was Christmases and birthdays that would get me these extra kits that I would paint during the year, and a little bit of extra like work here and there, cutting grass, washing cars, mostly for my mum and dad, which was probably counterproductive. But there was neighbours that needed their grass cutting, so I'd do that. Living in the middle of nowhere made it quite hard to do things like paper rounds and other sort of little part-time jobs to get some pocket money, because there was no newspapers or news agents. It was 10 houses in the middle of the countryside. So yeah, a little bit harder to earn a living, to pay for Warhammer. But hey, you know, you make ends meet somehow. And I cut grass and I washed cars. And that was how I started to fund my early years of the hobby. Now, as I mentioned, I had the 5th edition rule set, I had the rule book, so I knew how the rules would work. So I had a little bit of a look through those. Played a couple of like mock games with my dad, so I was using the Saurus at the time. Again, wasn't a big fan of them, but you know, that's not nothing against the Saurus, just wasn't for me. So I got a grips of the rules. So I decided to start making a little army list. And at this point, by this point where we're getting really into the game, I had 4 dwarf hammerers, 8 dwarf warriors, 4 slayers, I think a lord of some kind. I think it was the demon slayer. Oh, he's a cool model. Really like the demon slayer. And a dark-willed manticore, because you could have manticores in your army. These were the days when you would pay for your champions separately, and then at the back there was like a little bestiary where you could like have a dragon. There's many different types of dragons, or a manticore, or a griffin, or a swarm of spiders if you wanted to, and they could be in any army, which was great. So I was like, ooh, manticore. Dark-willed, pretty good. Got myself a little temple in there as well. So yeah, that was my army to start off with. Looking at the back of the books, you would see like the odd unit of 5 figures. No, No. That did not work out well. 4 hammerers, 4 slayers. They lasted about 4 minutes. Probably not even that. They were not on the table long enough to be of any use. But hey, you know, learning. That's how it works. So that was my first foray into the dwarf side of gaming. Really enjoyed it, and it never put me off. And I think that's something to throw out there to a lot of folks that are probably watching this going, what is he on about? That, you know, you could start off small with like 4 figures and just play through the rules. And I had a lot of fun. I mean, my slaves did all right, but yeah, I had a lot of fun just like with, 16 figures on a green mat covering over some books to make hills. That was literally what I used. Very bare bones gaming table right there. But hey, you've got to start somewhere, right? So with that being said, I'd, over the course of like a year or two, built up a small collection of dwarfs, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with them. There was so many colour schemes in the box set, so many cool like names of holds and stuff like that, some that were destroyed, some that still existed. And I was like, which ones do I pick? And I think the Slayer thing still, I don't know what it is about the Slayers, whether it's the big punk rocker orange hair, the stripy trousers, the extra canvas area to paint tattoos on their body and do woad. I mean, it kind of helped that they didn't run off in the game. That was probably a bigger reason for liking Slayers, more than likely. In the end, I settled on Karak Kadrin. Ungrim Iron Fist is the lord of that hold, and he is also a Slayer. Now, if you don't know anything about Slayers, I'm going to talk to you about Slayers. What are Slayers, Peachy? What are Troll Slayers? What are Giant Slayers? They're all the same thing. They just kill things and you ascend depending on how good you are at killing things. Now, a Slayer is a dwarf who's failed in some regard, or the family has some dishonour, and they basically have to earn that honour back. And by doing so, what they do is they shave a lot of their hair off, they keep the beards, but they have like a big punk rocker, they get pig fat apparently, that goes orange, and they just, you know, get their hair into a nice big punk rocker style, and they go out and find the biggest monster to kill. Now, you start off as a troll slayer, so you go out looking for trolls and kill trolls. Now, the idea of a slayer is to die killing the biggest thing to get the honour back, which is weird, because you'd think by killing the biggest thing, you've kind of got the honour back, but you have to die killing the biggest. It doesn't matter. Gotrek Gurnison, he's the worst of all the Slayers because he's failed. He can't be killed. He keeps killing things and he can't be killed, so he's a failure. He'll never succeed in scrubbing this shame, whatever he has, from his family and himself, because he just keeps killing the things. That's how you get rid of it. You've got to die killing the big thing, and you've got to put the effort in as well. You can't just like stand there and just get killed. You've got to actually put some effort in. So Slayers, you have a variety of different types, starting off in ranks, I suppose. You've got Troll Slayers, then it moves to Giant Slayers, then it moves to Dragon Slayers, then you get the big beef ones that have been around a bit longer, called Demon Slayers, and they usually tend to be like the characters that lead the Slayer force, if you like. And Ungrim Iron Fist, the Lord of Karak Kadrin, is both a Slayer and a Lord, so he's got 2 duties, the Slayer oath plus looking after his people. So he's torn, but it's also a nice little refuge for Slayers, so I thought, yeah, that makes sense, I like Slayers. He looks cool, he's got a big dragon cloak, he's got a big orange punk rocker hair, so yeah, why not go for Karak Kadrin? So that is where my army began its roots. The mighty hold of Karak Kadrin. Now, if you don't know much about dwarfs and where they're from, they live in an area in the old world called the World's Edge Mountains. They're very Tolkien-esque because they like living in mountains. They have massive, great big underground cities, tunnel systems. They're all linked to each other as well. So you've got all these holds that are all linked, but across the years, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, some of these holds have been destroyed, taken over by Skaven, orcs and goblins. We won't even go into the War of the Beard just yet, but those pesky elves, they didn't help. So yeah, so I knew roughly now where my army was situated, why it was, I guess, fighting who it was fighting. At that time as well, my dad and my brother were getting into the Empire and Dogs of War. I was getting some Dogs of War as well, we'll come to that. So most of the people I played against were my dad and my brothers, and it was Empire and humans, I thought, which felt a bit odd because actually in the books they got on quite well. So I've done a fair bit of waffling on about my love for dwarfs here, getting into it whilst I was quite young, and I found my army, and I'm just going to put some pictures up of my army. And there's a lot of stuff that surprised me. And be kind, please be kind. They are about 20 years old plus as paint jobs go. I did these when I was young. So don't be too harsh in the comments. I mean, you can be, I don't really care. I don't care about your opinion. If you're going to be harsh, it's your choice. But yeah, it was nice getting them out of the attic, opening them up and having a good look at them. And there's some choicey methods and techniques applied there. And I think I did most of these from a white undercoat as well, which is mental. But yeah, just opening that box and seeing my Longbeards, my Ironbreakers, my Slayers, the woad on those Slayers. Yeah, I think I'd do things different nowadays. The artillery, there's stuff that I forgot. I'd done like the flame cannon, like classic sort of red wood and blue wood on the flame cannon. Forgot I had a gyrocopter, a bunch of characters as well, obviously, for Grudge of Drong, as well as just like other random stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's like the updated warriors. Well, I say updated, the ones that were available at the time, before obviously 8th died and the old world died. But I did have 8 plastic warriors, the old classic ones, and I can't find them, so I don't know what I did with those, which is a bit sad. But yeah, some classics in there. And I also found a load of Dogs of War, but I'm going to save them for another video. Now, I briefly mentioned about the High Elves of Ulthuan and how the Dwarves didn't get on. Well, there's a reason for that. There was a whole thing called the War of the Beard. I know, the War of the Beard, a whole war about a beard. And what's that about? Now, as a kid, not really know much about this kind of stuff. I was like, why is there a war about a beard? That just doesn't make sense, but you know, people fight for less, right? Now, if you don't know your lore for the Dwarves and the Elves, they used to get on really well. Traded all the time, very ancient races. The Dwarves like their mountains, the Elves like their big towers. The Elves were colonising the old world, the Dwarves were digging deep and making all sorts of riches and golds, and they traded together, and the Empire was great, they got on. And there was this one guy, this emissary, that used to hang around with the Dwarves called Malekith, very low level kind of guy apparently. And he had ambitions, delusions of grandeur, and he then went off for reasons to go back to Ulthuan and created a whole civil war, and that's a whole story for another book and another wax lyrical about High Elves video, which we'll come to another time down the line. But long story short, Malekith kind of caused some problems back home with the pointy-eared guys, and then decided to dress up as High Elves at this point. So this is the weird bit, right? It says they dressed up as High Elves, but at that point, if they're in a civil war, they're probably going to be like similarly dressed anyway. But at this point, he wasn't like fully fledged evil and wearing like purple and black. Still High Elf. So yeah, that's just a weird thing, a weird segue. Like they're dressed as dark elves dressed as High Elves. Well, they weren't even dark elves at that point. They were in a civil war. Oh well. Yeah. Anyway, I digress. So he dressed up as High Elves and murdered, I say, lots of innocent dwarf tradesmen, caravans, people just going about their daily business. And obviously the dwarves didn't like this. They were not keen on watching their people getting slaughtered by elves. So as you can see, this is where it all went a bit belly up for the elves and the dwarves. Because, well, Malekith, being a bit, you know, naughty, decided to divide and conquer. And it worked well, because the dwarves, being stubborn, as I mentioned at the very start of the video, and obstinate and pig-headed, did not want to lose face here. So they're like, I can't believe the High Elves are doing this. They didn't use their brain. They didn't think this through. They didn't know about the news back home. They didn't care really. They lived in the mountain holds. So they just went off and killed some High Elves. And then I was like, what is going on here? So they carried on killing dwarfs, and then dwarfs carried on killing elves, and so on and so forth, tit for tat. And that's how it all came to be. Now the High King at the time, Gotrek Starbreaker, great name. Was Gotrek Starbreaker? I do believe it was Gotrek Starbreaker. Just need to double check that, because that'd be awful if I forgot it. High King, I put Sotrex, but it is Starbreaker. Okay. To try and deal with this situation, High King Gotrek Starbreaker sent an emissary to Ulthuan to try and, you know, make some peace talks, get a ceasefire, ease the tension. And the elf just shaved his beard off and sent him back. Dwarves don't like that. Beards are important. I mean, do you know how long it takes to grow a dwarf beard? No, neither do I. I have no idea. Probably a long time. I mean, what, I'm here? It's taken 14 years to get to this. 14 years. I mean, dwarfs are old, but yeah, so they shaved his beard. So this is how the whole war, the beard, and elves and dwarfs don't like each other. All because of just both being pig-headed and stubborn and not actually paying attention to what's going on around them. And two great races slowly fell into decline. And for the dwarves, sadly, more holds fell under the sway of like Skaven and orcs and goblins, because they were too busy fighting elves and not really paying attention to shoring up the defences at home. So A mighty empire of the dwarfs fell into ruin, and only a handful of holds exist to this day, or that day, the old world day. So this then kind of segues into a campaign book that came out called the Grudge of Drong. Now, I think I was probably 15, 16 at the time when this came out, probably a little bit older, a long time ago. And the idea of a campaign book, playing through a bunch of scenarios, I didn't really know much about it. Honestly, never judge your book by its cover, because when I saw this on the very front of the book, it's got a big dwarf slayer, and I was like, oh, Grudge of Drong, grudges, oh, oaths, slayers, I'm in. And there's nothing about slayers in this book entirely. However, I was still hooked in, because at this time, he had 4 cool scenarios. There was a dwarf brewery that was made out of cardboard that you can build up, which is something I might actually look at recreating with kit bashing some scenery down the line. That's something I definitely want to do, is recreate the dwarf brewery and probably do some battle reports based on that as well. But 4 new characters came out for the dwarfs, and the elves got some as well, because they're elves I can't remember them, but yeah, some important characters came out for the elves. But the dwarfs, they got a few mighty characters. They got Drong the Hard, good name. They've got Helga Longplatz, they've got Skag the Stealthy, and then Grungy Grudgebearer. So you got yourself a Dwarf Lord, a Dwarf Queen, some badass looking hero, and a cool runesmith. And yeah, I was sold on these models, got them as soon as I could. They're great looking figures. Drong looked really cool. Again, being young, not really at the time knowing the difference, you know, everything was black and white to me, it was not very grey. He just looked mega, and he had a crown on his helmet, and he seemed like a good guy. Recently read back over it, and he's an absolute idiot. Absolute stubborn idiot. Should have died. Helga should have killed him. So this whole campaign pack plays around 4 scenarios, really cool, really narrative. So you kind of play through one, and there is some, like, you know, if you win this happens kind of thing. And it's just really nice little storytelling, and there's some recommended forces that you use if you're playing both dwarves versus elves. There are some options if you don't have elves and you've got like people with orcs or Skaven or whatever, so different opponents, but it gives you some suggestions. But the idea is to play through as the elves versus dwarves. So I'll play through the first few. Got some drunken dwarfs. They're just hilarious, just, you know, because they're just busy having a great night at the brewery, and then you have to fight with a bunch of drunken dwarfs against like a load of high elves. That was hard. Now, if you know your War of the Roses history, it's the Yorkists versus the Lancasterians, Henry versus Richard III. But during this battle, there's a fella called Stanley, and he's not quite sure who to join yet. Does he join Richard? Because, you know, he's supposed to be the rightful king as the Plantagenet. Or does he join this little upstart called Henry? I'll just sit on the side and wait. And that is exactly what Helga did in the 4th and final battle of the Grudge of Drong. So you have to see what she does. Does she decide to side up with the elves, or does she join the dwarves? Because actually in this whole campaign pack, I didn't realise this at the time because I just wanted to play through the scenarios. She's very much like wanted to keep relations with the elves. There's a whole colony that's there that they're trading. Drong the Hard is not at all interested. He is the descendant of the Thrundlings. There's a whole backstory to this. The Thrundlings versus the Bronlings, 2 dwarf factions are at odds for many reasons, and Drong just wants the territory and to basically get the crown, because Queen Helga is in charge of the Bronlings, and he wants to make sure that, you know, he marries her, probably tops her off at some point, I don't know. But yeah, didn't quite work out that well for him. But great story, good story. Spoilers, sorry. But yeah, it wasn't anything about Slayers, and that was the whole reason I bought it. Never judge a book by its cover, as I said before. Who cares? It was great. Really enjoyed it. So I would like to see more stuff like that down the line from Forge World, Specialist Game Studio, if they did that, more Grudge of Drong style things. There was other things like the Perilous Quest and Chalice of Blood, was it? I can't remember now. Something for vampires. There was a few, and they're great. So Grudge of Drong really hooked me in with the dwarfs even more than what I was already. And they brought out some new models at that point as well. And this is something I want to touch on here, is the dwarf models at the time were sculpted by the legend that is Colin Dixon. And sadly to say, Colin is no longer with us. Such a shame, such a talented sculptor. So there's a little bit of a homage here to Colin as well. So many of his sculpts at the time, like the dwarf cannon, the characters from the Grudge of Drong, really kind of resonated me as a child, and I look back with such fondness. So he brought a lot of joy, not just to me, but to many others. Now, there's a great video by Jordan Sorcery as well, where he goes into the history of Colin Dixon, so it's worth checking that out. I'll drop that in the description. So rest in peace, Colin Dixon. You will be greatly missed. So I'm going to talk about my favourite mechanic of the Dwarfs, and that is the runes. And if you don't know much about Dwarfs, they're not particularly magical. They don't believe in wizards. However, they harness the winds of magic by hammering runes into items like armour, weapons, talismans, war machines, banners. So the Dwarf mechanic really is Runic Items. And for me, after like playing a vast array of different armies, most of them will have a wizard, you'd have like spells and stuff. Runic Items are just, it's just a genius mechanic. Because let's say I take Empire, I get magic weapon, I get magic armour, I get a magic ring, magic banner, a wizard. With the Dwarfs, you create your magic items from scratch. So there's a rule, you can only have 3 runes on an item, you can only have 1 master rune on an item, you can't have more than 1 master rune on the same item, that's a rule of jealousy, I believe. And then you can't duplicate that style of item as well. So let's say I put like 2 runes of fury and a rune of smiting on it, something like that. I can't have another weapon that has the exact same combination. So across the army, it gives you this sort of opportunity to make your own custom magic items. So in theory, you could have a lord that has a runic weapon with 3 runes on it, runic armor with 3 runes on it, a runic talisman with 3 runes on it. He could be a battle standard bearer, and that's also got 3 runes on it. So you could, I mean, it'll cost a lot in points, but you could really go to town making some really amazing combinations. And some people have done it, and you know, they get beardy, which is appropriate for Dwarfs, I think. But yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I was looking over the 5th edition rules, and I was looking over the 8th edition rules, and the rule mechanic hasn't really changed. A lot of the runes are very similar. Yes, of course, like some of the rule mechanics would have changed to deal with the different editions, but for the most part, the same runes are there, the same rules apply for making runes and stuff like that. So it's really nice as a mechanic. So if you don't know much about Dwarfs and their magical side of it, they don't believe in magic, they do believe in runes. And runesmiths are very jealous, apparently, of their runes. They don't like to pass on such knowledge. There's no written word with runesmiths. They make magical runes and then it gets forgotten because they're stubborn, sorry, pig-headed, obstinate. There we are, those words. It takes a while for a runesmith to find out if he sees a rune, like how was this made? Oh, I have to hit it 14 times over 14 days with some dragon's blood and a little bit of, I don't know, beardling wheat or something like that. So sometimes, you know, some runes have very particular ingredients that a runesmith might have to reverse engineer. Now, there's something I want to talk about. A few of you are probably waiting for me to get to this point. The Dwarf Tank. Now, I wonder if it'll ever come back out. It was a great kit. At the time, it was only in resin. I don't think they got as far as plastifying it, or at least going down the engineering side. They might have done, because when we had the resins, that probably would make sense. But during the time of like creating the Zhufbar army, you had the gyrocopters and gyro bomber that came out, and in a very similar aesthetic was a Dwarf Tank. I'm sure it'd have like a name like a Grudge Tank or something like that. No placeholder name. We just called it the Dwarf Tank. And it fulfilled 2 roles. It was a troop carrier with like places to put your troops on it. It had like a door that would open up like a landing craft with turrets on. And then there was another variant of it, which was sort of a Anvil of Doom, like a mobile Anvil of Doom. And it just looked so cool. And for whatever reasons, it just ended up panning out that it just didn't work or gel with the army. Someone pulled it. A lot of us disagreed at that time. It was like, it's so cool. Why is this not out? And in Age of Sigmar it looked cool. It just fit with the Dwarfs, the Dwarf vibe. And certainly if I'm playing Shadows of the Horn Rat, there's definitely Dwarf Tanks, because I certainly remember some like land fortress that you have to like rescue or fight alongside during the computer game of Shadow of the Horn Rat, but maybe I'm getting my memory all fuzzied up and mixed up, I don't know. But it was a great kit, really big, really sort of like stood out in the middle. Probably have like 3, I think I did 3 or 2 for the army. I don't know where they are now, probably locked deep in an archive somewhere. So I'm just going to put up a sketch as I remember. Honestly, right now, I'm like, did it have wheels or did it have tracks? I'm pretty certain it had tracks. Don't know why I had wheels in my head, but you know. But it looked very much like a stretched limo, larger version of same aesthetic as a gyrocopter with big guns on it. But I definitely remember the Anvil of Doom option as well. But hopefully, you know, with Old World coming out, it might come back out. Spoilers, never mind. But hey, it was, what, 15 years ago that happened? Well, never happened. So I think it's okay for me to wax lyrical about a really cool kit that never happened. However, fun fact, the most expensive basing kit at Games Workshop is the Tree Lord, because it has an element of said Dwarf Tank on the actual base. Because whoever, I can't remember, I think it was Seb that sculpted, forgive me if I get the sculptor wrong, but someone sculpted the Tree Lord kit, and they're like, I'm going to use some of the assets of that Dwarf Tank and stick it on the base. And obviously the Dwarf Tank never came out, so it's probably the most expensive basing kit ever, because what you're looking at 35 plus weeks of sculpting on that tank to only have a small section stuck on a base. Fun, love it. But yeah, Dwarf Tank, what are your thoughts? Should it come back out? Should it have just died as it did? Was it the right decision to pull it? I don't know, I disagree. Then for a time, my dwarves were packed away and put into an archive just for a while, not for long. I moved on to other stuff like Astra Militarum, Chaos, Dogs of War, many other factions. And then I started working for Games Workshop, and my dwarves made some brief appearances during my time at Games Workshop Derby and Sadlergate, and a couple of brief forays in the studio when I joined the studio team as well. Then I got the privilege, and it is a privilege, it was a privilege, to be involved in the 8th edition Dwarf Army. At the time, there was lots of like colour schemes that were being done by Heavy Metal. All the colours were being taken. I mean, there's only so many combinations you can do when you come up with colour schemes. But I was asked to come up with a brand new scheme, and at the time I was working with a guy called Jeremy Vitok. Jeremy is the funniest, most energetic human being I've ever met. He loves, well, he clearly loves the hobby, but he's a big fan of orcs and goblins, so dwarfs must have been hard for him. But hey, he really nailed the book, and it was great working with him. And he wanted me to do an army, a huge army for the book, and we settled on Zhufbar. It didn't get much exposure in the early days at Zhufbar. It was mentioned here and there, but we really wanted to explore it a bit more, and I got the opportunity to literally start from scratch, create how I wanted to. I came up with my own logos, not logos, iconography, there we are, iconography for the banners and stuff. So this time, all the dwarf banners and iconography would have like these mountain designs. Karak would have like a large peak with 2 smaller peaks either side, and then you have all the others that have like some kind of play on that as well. So I wanted to introduce that somehow. So I went away, sketched some ideas, and came up with a peak, because Zhufbar is very much an engineering-based hold. So they have like a huge air fleet of gyrocopters, gyro bombers. It's also where the Engineers Guild is. There's a big like underground sort of torrent and waterfall. So it was incorporating all those things. So I had like a cog symbol in there at the mountain. I had like some weird swirly, whirly Celtic design to represent the waterfall. But the colour, that was the trickiest bit. I mean, all the colours have been taken. Like Heavy Metal had taken the reds and the blues. Karak had all of it because they're greedy. So it was trying to like put a stamp on this particular hold. And I wasn't quite sure how to do it. And I did lots of tests and this, that, and the other. And in the end, I settled on a simple, but I think slightly different than what you'd seen before with some of the other holds. You've seen blue and white, granted quartered maybe for Karak Izor, I think, and also for Karak. But I went with Thunderhawk Blue. Now, Thunderhawk Blue is a weird colour because it's like a stormy sea blue green kind of colour. It's grey but blue but teal. Really find it hard to describe Thunderhawk Blue other than saying Thunderhawk Blue. If anyone has a better way of describing it, stick it in the comments, because it'll be nice to know what you'd refer it to. I've even done like lots of looking at like colour swatches to go, it's not that, it's not that. That sounds weird, it's definitely not that. But yeah, Thunderhawk Blue and sort of an off-white kind of creamy kind of tone, just like really worked for Zhufbar. And that was the colour scheme. I did one test on a dude and then just went full on painting everything. And that was a huge army. I mean, looking at the spreads in the book, I didn't realise we'd painted so much. I say we, I worked with a couple of other people helping out with like the odd unit here and there, but most of it was using all the new Longbeards that were also hammerers, using the new Ironbreakers that were also doubled up as Iron Drakes. Then you had like the Gyrocopters, the Gyro Bombers, Belagar, That was the Dwarf Lord plastic clan pack. You got a new Runesmith, Engineer. There was so much stuff. Oh, the Slayer just jumping off. He's got a weird name now, like Unforged or something like that for Age of Sigmar. So I had a lot of fun just experimenting with colour on the army. So many different like combinations of just using the Thunderhawk blue with the creamy white kind of colours. Take the Ironbreakers, for instance, mostly metal and gold. How do I get colour on that? I mean, they're covered in armour, chainmail, plate mail. There's not much, so the shields were a great place to add that colour. But in the end, I also opted for doing lacquered armour as well. And that really came into being when I started doing my Ventrilian Nobles, because at that time I'd done the Ventrilian Nobles, paint them black, gloss them, did that for the Empire as well. It's a really nice way of painting lacquered armour. And I incorporated that into the Dwarfs, so I introduced some of those tones onto the actual plate mail, shields, helmets, gloss them a little bit as well, so it looked more like they were lacquered armour. So what would initially be just a blob of silver with bits of gold, I was able to introduce colour onto those as well. Then you had your long beards with the big beard, so you could add some colour in there as well. The Iron Drake's got a nice bit of copperiness because they've got those big sort of like flame cannon things. And they've got like a beard with like, is that like a metal beard that comes from the helmet, which looked mega. So yeah, just having fun playing around with those. Did some articles for White Dwarf at the time as well. And it was a great time to be alive. As a fan of Dwarfs from an early age, being involved in this project was just a dream come true. And I got to put my own stamp on an army. So Zhufbar was my creation, with the help, obviously, of Jeremy Vitok. And he was talking about doing some like Regiments of Renown as well, and that's something I really wanted to get into. And we never really got to do that with the End Times. I was really eager to, and for whatever reason, we didn't do much with the Dwarves. But the Longbeards, I kind of incorporated a little bit of that, because he mentioned like, oh, it'd be really cool to have like these wandering regiments that go from hold to hold, and in the book they mentioned something called the Gold Shields, and I was like, oh, I quite like that. So I'm gonna do this unit of Longbeards with gold shields. They might not necessarily be the gold shields that are in the book, but it kind of gave them just a different look. They still had the same colour palette, but just all had gold shields, whereas everyone else had like that kind of quartered, halved kind of look to it. So it was great. Really enjoyed that, and I would love to go back in time and just sit and repaint those things. In fact, sod it, let's just paint some now. Let's paint a Zhufbar Dwarf. Let's just sit down, get an Ironbreaker out or a Longbeard and paint a Zhufbar Dwarf. Yeah, let's do that. So before we begin painting our Zhufbar Ironbreaker, I just want to mention I've been sent a load of stuff by Army Painter, including the new Warpaint Fanatic stuff. Now I've heard nothing but good things about these paints. Very used to Citadel stuff, very used to AK stuff. So I'm always excited about trying new paints. So this paint guide is predominantly going to be using Army Painter stuff, and just see how it compares to other stuff I've used in the past. So I'm very excited about that. Now, when I did my army, the Zhufbar army for Games Workshop, I used Thunderhawk Blue. I don't have any more Thunderhawk Blue. It must have dried up, or it's just gone somewhere. It's in a box. So I'm going to see what kind of equivalent I can get from that, which is going to be quite exciting as well, because I like to see the different equivalents that are out there, or something close to it. And you know what? At the end of the day, if it doesn't 100% match, it's still a fun little paint guide about painting a little dwarf man with a beard. So let's get to it and use these new paints. Yeah! So first up, we need to undercoat our dwarf, and I'm going to be using a silver spray here. I've got chrome spray from AK, but again, any metallic undercoat will do the job. Right, next up, I'm going to get some Thunderous Blue. This is as close as I can get to Thunderhawk Blue. Don't have a pot of Thunderhawk Blue at hand, which is fine. And now all I'm going to do is just start base coating that over all the bits I want blue. And actually, I quite like this. It's very similar to the Fang. So if you have Citadel paints or anything like that, that is quite close to it. And I quite like the blue, so it works quite nice. But you know, down the line, might add some Thunderhawk if I can get hold of any. Now, when doing things like the shield, like if you're doing half or quarter, just do a rough line to start off with, because you've got all that knotwork in the way. So just block it all in, and then you can always neaten up the line after, especially when you start doing the white side as well. Just make sure you get a good coverage over it. And then when we move on to the white side, again, a couple of thin coats, just work your way along, get into all that knotwork first, and then you can just be a little bit neater about that line where it matters. In all that knotwork, it really doesn't matter. Get a few coats on the other bits. So I'm trying to do like an ad hoc kind of effect here, so the opposite of everything. So whether the white's on the shoulder pad, on the opposite side with blue, then flip reverse that on the helmet, and so on and so forth. And just do a second coat if you need to. Some places you won't, Some places you will. Then we're going to move on to some bright gold. Very nice colour indeed, very striking. So first just going to pick out some of that knotwork, but if you can just angle your brush a little bit, you can just do like a little flick over some of that knotwork on the shield. Not quite a dry brush, it just helps pick out some of those edges so you know where you're working to. It can be quite hard to define some of those knotwork designs. So yeah, just do that first and then you can pick it out. Just go around, pick out those rivets. Again, I'm going to make mistakes here. It's normal. I'm going to be getting gold on some of that blue. I'm going to be getting gold on some of that white. These are small models. They're at a distance as well, especially when you're painting for camera. It's a little bit trickier, so I'm not so bothered. Just work your way around. Probably a second coat, maybe in places. To be fair, this bright gold is really good, so I don't think you'll need a second coat. Do that tricky little bit around his beard and his eyes. It's a really cool Viking-esque kind of helmet as well. I really do like the Ironbreakers. They've got such a cool look. A lot of knotwork though. Lots of twirly-whirlies on the helmets. A little bit tricky. And of course, twirly-whirlies around the back. So I'm just going to pick those out as well. Yeah, probably do a second coat on that first little twirly-whirly design. That's the technical term we're going with, twirly-whirly. And of course, don't forget any details on the weapon. Then I'm just going to get some black. Here I'm using matte black. Just going to pick out any of the black details. So that's just straps really, and because the Ironbreakers are covered in armour, so any straps that you find. And then the weapon haft, I suppose, because that's really all that there is. They've got armoured gloves on. You don't need to use the gloves. I mean, if you want a black beard, you can do a black beard. Speaking of beards, bit of brown, oak brown, slap that on. Now you will notice there is a little sort of gold ringlet on his beard. I'll just pick that out after, just get it all brown, and then I can just pick out the little gold ringlet when I'm done. Now the back of the shield, I'm just flipping it around, just picking out any gold details on the back of that. This is kind of more of a, not a tie-up stage, just once I've done the front and it's dry. And same for the straps there, just going to pick those out in black. And then we're going to get some dark tone and apply this all over. Again, if you've got Black Knight or if you've got Norn Oil. Norn Oil probably will be better than Black Knight because it's not matte and you want some of that shininess coming through for the armour. But dark tone is a nice middle ground for this, so that's why I'm using that instead. It's black and it won't dry super matte. Big bubble there, got rid of it, see, popped it. Again, just be mindful when it starts to pull, always be on the wash watch, so to speak. Pick out the hammer, his head. I mean, you could use panel liner if you wanted to, but I just quite like using washes. Creature of habit. Again, just work your way around, some of that knot work. You might have to do, once it's dry, maybe a second, sort of like a little bit in some of the deeper recesses, maybe. It's not necessary. Just check around, anything that looks like it's pulled, just soak up with your brush. And of course, let's not forget that shield. And it will pull at the bottom, that's fine. You can soak that off and move it around. Right, tidy up stage, going to get some of that thunderous blue again, just pick out some of the blue details. Just in case it needs a bit more pop in places, because the wash will knock it back a bit. If you're feeling really brave, pick out some of those little bits between the knotwork. And of course you've got things like the shoulder pads to do the back of the armour. Anything that you've literally painted that kind of blue tone, or whatever colour you've picked for your dwarf hold, just go back up and tidy up. Again, you're not trying to pick out every section, you just, some of the raised areas, and it will just give it a bit of a blend, a bit of a layer. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the white. Again, pretty thin down here, just work my way around. Also at this point, if you realise you got a bit of gold by accident on the shoulder pad, you can tidy it up, although I would probably say that wash will probably have hidden it, so don't stress it. And then, yep, just around the back of the helmet. Again, adds just a little bit more punch to that off-white tone that we've got with the brain matter beige. And of course got the shield to do as well. And if you do make mistakes and get some accident on the knot work, or you've splodged on like a rivet, again, just pick it back out, maybe drop a little bit of wash in there, it'll be fine. When you're doing a unit of 20 of these or whatever, you're not going to care. And I get some shining silver, and then just, I'm not relayering here, I'm just picking out some little bits here and there where the light would probably hit it, and if it just looks a bit dull in places, not going to go super mad. This is one method of using the silver, just picking out some flat areas that could just do with a little bit more love or a little bit more punch, a bit more brightness. Pick out those little fingers. When I was doing a hammer here, I just like wiped my thumb on it so it kind of blended in a bit more, because that shade was quite nice actually where it was. So I wanted that to not be completely covered over, just subtle. And then I'm going to continue using shining silver, and what I'm going to do here is do a little highlight for my golds, and also add to the silver as well, like the chainmail and stuff, so it all works out quite well. So I'm using a small army painter dry brush here, one of the synthetic ones, and then just gently going over anything that's metallic, being mindful not to try and get it on the blue or the white. You could probably do this before you tidy up if you really wanted to, and just, it's a nice small brush so I can just really get into the face bits as well. Then get some sponge, again, thank you Daz Lathan, great technique. Put it into a little brush sleeve, and then treat it much like a dry brush. I'm going to get some paint on there. I've got True Blood, I'm going to do a little bit of blood spatter on his hammer, and then just like I would with chipping, I'm just going to start stabbing that on. The reason for using the sponge is just so it looks like he's been hitting whatever multiple times, and there's just a bit of blood splatting around. That's why I've used the old chipping technique. Ugh, it's full of brain matter. Using the same colour, just going to pick out the gem. Felt like it needed a bit of a red on it, on that gem, so I'm just using the same colour, dry bit shiny. At this point, now if you think like some of your recesses are a bit flat or a bit meh, all you can do is get some like matte black, thin it down a little bit, and then just get into those deeper cracks where the wash hasn't quite done what you want to do. This is not necessary, this is not something you should do. I just like doing it just in case, you know, some of those joins just need a little bit more definition between one colour to the next. Helps bridge the gap. Then I'm going to get some gloss varnish, gloss that little red gem on the shield, gloss all the armour panels as well. For some reason, don't know why, I only showed glossing on the blue. I'd also do it on the white as well. Don't know why I just concentrated on the blue. That was a weird camera choice. But yeah, both colours get glossed. And in all his might, the Zhufbar Ironbreaker is spinning gloriously on that turntable. What a sight to behold. Well, that was a bit of fun. I got to paint a Dwarf Ironbreaker, a nice trip down memory lane, and I got to do it all with new paints never used before. And the verdict really is, I'm pretty impressed with this new Warpaint Fanatic range. I'm used to Citadel, I'm used to AK, fairly familiar with those paints. And yeah, these have hit hard, these paints have. So they've come out with this whole range of Fanatic acrylics. You've got loads of metallics, loads of special effects paint. I mean, I only used like one, which was the blood paint, but there's like loads of like rust ones, there's like plasma glow ones. So you'll probably see in upcoming videos a lot of those being used as well. I've used the shades before. I've used dark tone or strong tone. I used dark tone in this one. I can't remember if there's a strong tone as well. I have to have a look, swat up, a lot of swatting up to do. But at the time I was working for workshops, so I got like the washes for free. So I used it a bit because it was a bit playing around with other colours. So yeah, expect to see more of these paints being used because I really like them. And I'd say they're on par with AK as well. Some people disagree, that's fine. But opinions are allowed. I mean, obviously in the UK, we're pretty open to a lot of things. Apparently opinions, we're not. Oh well. So yeah, I really enjoyed using those paints. On the actual Zhufbar Dwarf, if I was to do one thing different, I would probably have dry brushed that silver over the gold and the silver armour before doing the tidying up. So sometimes when you do things, it's nice to reflect and think, what would I do different to help speed the process up? And that would be that. But yeah, that was fun. Well, we're almost at journey's end. I've waxed lyrical about dwarfs quite a fair bit. Just sitting down talking about dwarfs has got me excited about dwarfs again. Sitting painting a Zhufbar dwarf certainly got me excited. Now, if you like this style of video, do let me know, because I do plan to do more, like an Empire one, a Dark Elf one, other Warhammer related fun, but also not just Warhammer. you know, I'll talk about Astra Militarum, I'll talk about why I love redcoats and go into lots of detail about Sharp, and a fun video about Cobra Commander and Cobra. And if you don't know anything about what I'm talking about there, it's an 80s cartoon. It's pretty cool. Knowing is half the battle, but I digress. Dwarfs, love dwarfs. Thank you for watching me wax lyrical about dwarfs. Until next time, yeah. There's a dwarf saying, but I can't remember it. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna find the dwarf saying. There's always a dwarf saying. There's lots of dwarf saying, like, get out manling, or you don't trust an elf. Don't trust an elf is a true dwarf phrase. Never trust an elf. And they kept that in Lord of the Rings. This is such a good book. I love the old books, and I can still smell that fresh book smell. No dwarf sayings right now, folks. Just, we hate elves. Elves are weak. Never trust an elf. Well, there we go. Thanks. Bye. Well, there we are. Almost at the end of this waxing lyrical about dwarfs. I've got hiccups. Oh no. Just dunking a custard cream. Don't mind me. Carry on. How paint your Zhufbar dwarfs or whatever it is you're doing. Just look away. Custard creams aren't the best biscuit to dunk, but they're all right. And you've complained that there's not been enough biscuit action in my videos so far, so that was a custard cream. There's more on the side here, and I will eat them.